Hello, welcome back to the Transfer Flow podcast. And on today's episode, we do our first player deep dive of the season, looking at Phil Foden. How did the player of the year from last season turn into this? Then we look at Aston Villa, who've had an almighty drop-off over the last 8 games. What's going wrong and how can Unai Emery correct it? And then we take a little tour of some of the other stories from the Premier League this weekend. So we're back for another podcast. Ted, you're back from the USA. How are you doing?
My audio is much better. Thank you for those of us who persevered through that last week. I ate all the turkey, had a good amount of stuffing, ate a lot of Tex-Mex because my parents live in kind of North Fort Worth area. And I'm back in jet lag. There you go.
Well, we'll clip out the bit where you said you had a good amount of stuffing. That will become relevant when we get to some of our B-roll material, I imagine, over the coming weeks. But look, we said that we were going to do some player profiles, right? And there are a bunch of players this season who've had significant glow-ups, a couple who've gone the other way. Ted,
the euphemism is going to kill me the whole time.
Game face. So we thought we'd start with Phil Foden. Basically, we didn't want to talk about Man City again because Man City are in a spiral at the moment, and they played the team who are 9 points clear at the top of the league at the weekend, and it was expectedly awful. But Phil Foden's an interesting one. He was player of the year last season in the Premier League. Some of us would say generously. But he feels like he's kind of fallen into the Pep rotation vortex. You know, I think about that time Laporte was in the team of the year. The next season, he played 15 games. Bernardo was City's player of the season in 18-19, made the team of the year, played 22 90s the next season. Grealish won a treble.
Yeah, but Grealish, there's extenuating circumstances there.
Well, yeah, you've got to like kind of dry him out, I guess, before you can get him on the field.
Yeah, and you could never dry him out enough so that like you could actually play him, more than 2 90s in a week. So.
Yeah, you got to wring him out. Okay, well, Phil Foden is kind of in this category, right? He's made 6 league starts so far this year, so he's played about 50% of the minutes, despite the absence of Kevin De Bruyne. He's only got 1 goal involvement in the Premier League so far, admittedly from something like 4 XG. So, if those numbers were normal, maybe everyone would be a bit more normal about this. But Ted, when you've watched Foden this season, when you've looked at his stats, is there something that's immediately standing out to you as something that's different about him? Or is this a situation where the entire team is kind of changing around him?
Yeah, I have no idea. So often I'll come in with like an informed take and people enjoy it, but like I have no fucking clue. We're looking at a guy who scored 19 goals last year off 106 shots, which is almost double his expected goals, right? But he's actually a pretty good finisher. We've seen that over time. It seems to be pretty sustainable. And then obviously this year. And what's interesting is like, he's a little under. Yeah, so he's 1.4 under. He has no goals so far on 20 shots. And he's only seen half the playing time. But City are just horribly broken. And Foden isn't necessarily the type to fix the problem. He's a little bit of the type to be able to... One of the things you like about him, right, is like if you have to go into a game and you're going to have sustained possession in the final third, Foden's a good finisher. And he's a good finisher sort of from the edge of the box, which is something that the analytics guys have been saying for ages. If you know you have those players, create shots for them, and then you will, potentially be more successful than your average terrible player like Emmanuel Eboué taking shots from the edge of the box. And so that was part of his role. His role is also to be a creative passer, which he was good at as well. But if City's game plan doesn't actually seem to be doing that, and Pep is like desperately casting around for players that can do multiple roles, shore up the defensive side, and still be able to score enough, like that seems to be the deficiency. Now, he might have come out of the summer and been exhausted. He might have come out with like a slight knock. We don't really know that. But he is getting to play enough that like you'd think that, the player of the season last year, which is a pretty big accolade in the toughest league in the world, would do something. And now it's like the meme where like it's the stick figure poking the horse with a stick and like do something, and nothing's happening.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's... Because the thing is, he's maintained his shot numbers. He's getting the same number of shots, but the shot quality has quite considerably deteriorated. It's gone from about 0.1 XG per shot to 0.07 is what I've got. And that, given that you're losing those shots from De Bruyne, you're losing Alvarez's shots, you're losing Rodri's shots, who was getting, kind of 2 shots, and they're normally pretty good efforts from the top of the box. I looked at this, and actually, of the 7 players who were getting 1.5 shots a game for City last season plus. One is left. That's Alvarez. One's out for the season. Doku, Grealish, and De Bruyne have barely played. So the only two left who are regulars are Foden and Haaland. And yes, you've got Savio coming in. But then you look at guys like Gvardiol getting more shots, Kovacic getting more shots. It doesn't really feel like there are the options around there for a guy like Foden, who is, to sound like a kind of football Twitter dick, that he's more of an associative player, it feels like, rather than the Odegaard, Cole Palmer, De Bruyne type, who's just kind of like going to run your game.
I think maybe that's true, but also like he's the thing that puts them over the top. And because they're not at the top, maybe that's the gap in between it. But like, you don't really want, Gvardiol might be a good finisher. You don't really want Kovacic like taking a lot of shots. Like historically, that's not been part of a good plan, no matter what team he's on. He is one of the better creative passers in the world, but like you don't want to have him, open up the creative passing, having to cover the defensive side in front of the the center backs, and to be able to take all those shots, because like that role is too much for his age in particular. I don't think anybody has an idea, and I think we've been saying this, any idea how to fix City right now, including Pep. And that's sort of crucial. I think that, they'll be listening to him. We will start to see a flood of rumors soon. And there are teams that are already kind of pitching some of their players, or agents in particular, like, hey, please have our player for 50 to 100 million, 125 million pounds. Yeah, I think the question now, and they are lower, they are underneath a Brighton team that has 5 draws in the league, is like, how dead are they, right? And if the sanctions were to come down now, then that would be sort of that would seal the season. It's not even a big deal at that point. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think that January is going to be helpful to them, but top 4 helpful and no longer league helpful.
Well, yeah, because even when there are still choices going on in the games. Like, look, obviously Pep is much better at this than I am, but there are still choices going on in the games where you kind of think, I'm not even convinced that this is the best option under these circumstances. So, for example, in the Liverpool game, it really felt like Rico Lewis was kind of running their attacking game in the final third much more often than it was Bernardo Silva or Foden. And maybe that's about how they were being marked, but he also rolled out a formation or rolled out a setup which conceded 3 goals in fairly short order to Feyenoord in the Champions League. So it just seems like we're in the throw shit at the wall phase. And then, but like Arsene Wenger used to do this, right? Where he'd be like, oh God, we're in the shit. I'm going to try a bunch of stuff. Maybe something will work. And then if it worked, he'd stick to it for like a year and a half until it was an absolute disaster.
If you guys haven't seen it, Kim wrote some pieces earlier in the year about your team's struggle era lineups, and some of those in particular were awful. So I would recommend going back and seeing some of those terrible Arsene Wenger lineups. But maybe we should move on and actually give Liverpool credit for that, because they were awesome. And Rico Lewis running things was probably a tactical choice. Like, Liverpool are good enough to be able to create that tactical setup consistently. So I think that one is, I would lean toward giving them a lot of credit, like, because City have been hemorrhaging in a lot of different ways against different teams doing different stuff. But in this case, like, Liverpool were utterly dominant in a way that they have not been against other lesser teams. So it was sort of a good time of style and poor personnel. And anytime that this type of team, like a really good pressing team, is fragile, and you have the runners that Liverpool have, like, so in today's TTF roundup, we have an argument about a player we'll talk about in a minute as potentially the best player in the Premier League. But I'm sure that Salah on the full gallop is the most terrifying player in the league, like by a lot. Nobody ever wants to see him in space running with the ball.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, kind of like the guy we're going to talk about who gets doubled up on a lot. Every team comes into a game against Liverpool thinking the last thing we could do is let Salah get in space. And then you watch a team like City, who, despite their injuries and their problems, have lots of excellent talent and have the best manager ever, or certainly one of the best managers ever. And you just see Salah get free again and again and again and get up to galloping speed up against whoever has ended up on the left side of City's defense. And I just think even if your defense is really cooking, you're going to struggle with that situation.
It's not just him, though. You have to give credit to their distribution, right? Like they know that they have the opportunity to put him in space often as long as they get the pass there, right? And Trent, I think, was often on the other side of the pitch when some of those passes were coming in.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, that's also an interesting tactical wrinkle that's slightly different. So yeah, it's not just knowing that you have the weapon; it's creating the execution to get those weapons into dangerous space over and over again. And I think that is something that Liverpool have been better at this year, while keeping defensively sound than they were in the late years under Klopp.
Yeah, I mean some of the balls in this game that were played, the Trent one that's kind of straight and kind of curves back out from inside. I mean, it's absolutely staggering. And I truly don't know how they're going to replace that if he ends up jumping ship to Real Madrid.
Let's not talk about that yet because it's not relevant.
Well, let's hope that it happens. But yeah, I don't know. With Foden, I think an interesting things to watch to going forward. It might be his expected goal and assist per 90 numbers. They've stayed exactly the same this season as last season, but there has been a shift in the balance. So he's getting more of it's coming from expected assists than from XG this season. So from passes he's creating rather than shots that he's getting. It feels like some of this is still about like funneling things towards Haaland. And when you look at that shot map, it does feel like the high value shots, sure, they're not there, but also there's that cluster just inside the box towards the right hand side, which is looking at where the goals have come from, kind of where he looks like being a plus shooter.
I flagged up about a month ago that I think Doku is probably a big part of the problem. Like he just does not have shots in good spaces. And so if you've got Doku on the pitch for any period of time, like you're looking at, he's not a goal threat from his position where you need to have a goal threat. The best teams have three sort of spaces of attention, right? And sometimes it's like two, and then they'll have a late runner that comes in. So that's Bellingham is sort of that classic example as well. If you've got a lot of dominant attention up front that drags the center backs toward the goal, then the space that opens up in the center of the pitch is super valuable, and you can't cover all of it. You've got to be aware of everything. City right now, if they only have like one real player that is terrifying everybody, or like 1.5, then that's an absence of balance on that, and it allows teams to be a little less worried. Like we've seen City have a bunch of 20-shot games where they're not racking up like 3, 4, 5 goals, right? And in the past, when they had awesome goal quality or shot quality, then you would see more of that. Here, I think they're a little more pedestrian. They're a volume team at the moment, and that's not helping them. And also the fact that they're trying to get more players forward and into that attack means that they're unbalanced when teams are able to exploit the space the other way. And Kyle Walker's 34 and can't just get out of jail free.
It's an interesting one. It feels like there were a lot of knock-ons from their transfer business over the last couple of windows. But I'd be intrigued to see how good Foden would be if everything else were kind of working. If Rodri's in there, if they had another shot taker in the front line besides Haaland, I've got to imagine that he would be better. But it's an interesting time for them to be seeing this performance from him. They've now.
Let's contextualize this for a second, though, right? How many teams in the league would trade their past 6 seasons for City's past 6 seasons, allowing them to age a little more? Right? Usually it's like a 2 or 3 season window. Liverpool had that, then they had to rejig and revamp it. And then they also had to replace a head coach, right? So it feels like, City are crashing. How could they bother to do this? Like, why haven't they done better? And the answer is they aged a bit. They weren't sure if Pep was going to stick around. You want to keep him as happy for as long as possible. And this is the result of it. But in the meantime, they've been the most dominant team that the Premier League has ever seen in an extended era. It's not just like a couple seasons. It's been a really long run. So I think that everyone would make the exact same trade-off. And now they've got a lot of work to do. And it's intriguing to see what type of results they'll get. But in the meantime, can't complain too much.
Okay. Right. Well, let's move on from Manchester City then to a fan base who are kind of complaining a bit at the moment. Aston Villa. You flagged this up a few times, only in passing, but it kind of deserves some attention. Aston Villa got into the Champions League last season and they went out and they had a big summer. They spent a lot of money. Lost 3-0 to Chelsea this weekend. That means that they're now on a run of 1 win in their last 8, including 3 losses, 4 draws. So at the beginning of this run, After 5 games of the season, they were third. They had the third best non-penalty expected goal difference in the league. They're behind City and Liverpool. They're now 12th. They've got a -3 actual goal difference, though their expected goal difference is still pretty good. I think it's something like 6th. Where do you want to start with this one, Ted?
I think our podcast compatriot Ravi Ramaneni probably had the most insightful analysis on this, given that he was a fan of a team that Unai Emery was at before, which is that this is just par for the Emery course. Like sometimes his teams will spike a really good result, get into the Champions League, or they'll be like super talented and they'll be able to carry off dominance even despite this. But then usually the second or third year, you see them regress to the mean. And it's because his teams are not attacking dominant. And often the tactical setups leave them in places where, variance will bite you. Like if you're not super dominant and you have a team that plays basically on par and is trying to eke out 1-goal wins, you will have problems. and what we're seeing right now is Villa having some problems. And it feels like their attack is better than it's ever been. The midfield may be a little bit fragile, but it's not. Like, look, they spent a lot of money and they have depth in the squad. People are like, oh, they're playing so many games. Like, yeah, welcome to Champions League football, guys. But like, you also have spent like a bazillion in pounds in the last couple of years in order to try and shore that up. They're not missing one player. They're missing a tactical style that allows them to be consistently dominant and to eke out, well, not eke out, but like batter teams and not have to eke out wins.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're a little bit tired after the Champions League, you don't necessarily think that would take you from the beginning of the season where they were a +1 expected goal difference per 90 to now when they're -0.1 expected goal 0.90 per 90. That is a big change. I mean, it does also feel like last season the defense was really, really bad. And they kind of on the other end, they had Watkins and Bailey having great seasons. And Watkins is great and had a great season, and Bailey is okay and had a great season. They added a real defensive midfielder, or tried to add a real defensive midfielder in Amadou Onana, and then he's been their number 1 ball winner, but he's also been hurt quite a lot. So he should be back soon. That might help a bit. McGinn, I think, is also a useful defensive presence, though I'm not sure how much I love him in other regards. I'm just not sure that they've built a team that can really defend in transition super well, or a team that's really going to press super effectively. I don't know. Maybe they can.
I think the lack of aggressive press is there, and they're kind of in this malaise in the middle of the pack, right? So like they have 19 points, like Forest have 22. That's only 1 game difference really between the two of them. The metrics are not too far off, and that sort of therein lies the problem. You get a Fulham team that is also kind of in and around that area. Again, if you're not elite, then you're kind of riding the waves of variance and riding the talents. Like if Ollie Watkins has an average season, then this team is, they might. The other thing that Robbie said was that Unai's probably going to have his best moments in the knockout rounds of the Champions League. And I don't disagree with that. Like he has proven over time to be very good at knockout setups. That is okay as long as you're regularly in the Champions League, or if you're okay being in the Europa League and then potentially winning that competition. But it's not a repeatable formula for success for a team that has spent like they want to be regularly in the Champions League.
Yeah, I think, look, if they were in the Europa League, I think they'd be among the favourites, and I kind of think they've got a good chance of doing something there. In the Champions League, I can imagine them having a good run, but I don't think they're going to have a win the competition good run.
I don't know. We've seen teams finish in that top 4 that have been unexpected recently.
Like Villarreal.
able to grind out results and end up in the good spots. So like it's not unheard of. I think that their fans are suffering a little bit, but they're mostly suffering from expectations that were too high coming into the season. I think at this point, you kind of sit back, ride the wave for the rest of the year, enjoy the knockout rounds of whatever competition that you're in, and hope that you can backdoor into the European places because you're not bad and you've got some pretty good talent.
Yeah.
That's about the best expectation I could see.
Yeah, I do think it's kind of Gary Monk syndrome, isn't it? When people really buy into the success that's happening now, and then when it regresses, they think, what? Our default position should be to be amazing.
I'm wondering if Gary Monk even manages anywhere right now. I like
no, he can't do. Surely not.
I was like,
there's no way.
I haven't heard that one for a while.
No, he's in a monastery where he belongs. Okay, so moving on from Villa, then we'll keep an eye on Villa, but it's interesting. I was going to say it's interesting to watch, and that's not really true. But it just feels like they can get the ball into the final third. They can't really get it into the box. They get the ball into the box about as often as Everton, which is not super exciting. But there's tons of talent there. I think they'll be fine. It's just
they're also good at executing at set pieces. They've been consistently dangerous over recent weeks at that, and that's actually holding up their expected goals numbers. So it's the open play side of it that's really letting them down. Against Bournemouth, they were very dangerous off of set pieces. Like they just are, and they've got some big, strong players as well. So if they could find a way to magically create more open play goals, like every single other team that's sort of suffering in the middle of the pack of whatever league they're in, then they'll be fine. But I'm not sure that fine is good enough.
Yeah, they just got they're saying to Tielemans, can you do all the passing in the midfield and can you do all the passing in attack? And like Tielemans is not that good. Like very few people are that good.
Well, they have a very good elite attacking left back in Ian Mason, who has been sort of in and out of the squad. Like Digne used to take long throws at Everton, and I was hoping that they would bring that back, but I'm not sure that we've seen so much of that. You got like a 5'7" fullback that's like chucking the ball into the box. Like I enjoy that level of execution, even if it's from weird teams.
Yeah, it was a niche interest. Okay. I think on the topic of teams who are kind of like a bit Jekyll and Hyde, it might be interesting to talk about Brentford. Because again, as you've noted in the variance betting newsletter several times, Brentford's home games against shitty teams are appointment television. They're absolutely staggering. And there was another one this weekend.
We drink together. So they win the Bender of the Week over and over again. I've described previous Brentford home games as Russell Brand after a month, on the lam, traveling through Europe or South America, or wherever he happens to be allowed to be without being extradited. And I think that these Brentford home matches are awesome to watch against the smaller teams. You're going to ask me why they score so many goals, aren't you?
Not necessarily. What I was going to ask is, they seem to just say, well, we play this way against these teams and this way against these teams. Like it does feel like there's a kind of switch marked, this team is crap. And if they think that team is crap, then they're going to fly at them. You can see this in the pressing numbers. You watch them play like City, Liverpool, their PPDA is like 24, 30. You see them play crappy teams and it's like 7-8 against Ipswich, against Leicester.
So it takes a few years for teams to be able to switch this on and off. And Brentford have been pretty consistent. They've got the same head coach for a long time now. It's definitely a tactical choice, and it is a tactical choice that revolves around having a relatively uninjured squad, which Brentford have had ups and downs with so far this season. They're less worried about these lower teams' weapons, right? Like if you've got sort of top championship quality, lower Premier League quality, they're like, okay, our defenders are good enough to clean that type of problem up. If you have the elites, then they're like, okay, we have a talent mismatch and we need to gum up the game. And that's part of it too. I think another element is like, again, being smart enough to understand talent mismatches and tempo. So if you're going to create more per attack and more per set piece, then you are very happy to basically be able to win those. And I feel like I'm opening the kimono a bit here, because this is stuff that like we discovered and talked about in building blocks of building a plus EV club, a decade ago. So like all those things are a pretty big deal. And then the other thing is I think they think they can transition a lot against these types of teams, and against elite attackers, they can't. And so that's one reason why you see that. And it feels like in the highlights, you just see them constantly on the run in attack. And that's like an intentional choice for them, but not every team makes that choice. So I think that those elements combine to create a really interesting set of circumstances that they exploit as often as possible.
It's interesting what you say there, because I was thinking, obviously we've talked about Thomas Frank before and, our high opinions of him. But it seems strange that it's seen as an audition for a bigger club when a manager insists on playing a style that they know is going to get brutalized in the Premier League, rather than seeing this as a positive, this ability to coach radically different styles. Like that to me seems like a really good indication of a manager's intelligence and communication.
I think Thomas is a fascinating pragmatist, and he certainly deserves to have a bigger appointment next year. Like, not saying that like Brentford isn't a great place, but I think that at this point, like, he should go on to challenge himself and see what he really can do. Graham Potter got that opportunity very early on, and it might have been a little early for him, although Potter's style is a little more possession based. I think Thomas, I'm less certain about his ability to coach possession style, but he might have learned that over time. And I think that, when you look at some of the elite managers around Europe, say a Conte, for example, like, he doesn't coach an elite possession style. He grinds things out. He mixes things up. He then creates circumstances that are advantageous to the talent on hand. Sometimes he'll be very pointed about not having the right talent on hand and criticize the ownership and the media. But I think Thomas is a little bit like that. He's shown that he can coach consistently a sound defense and eke out and spank the pants off these lesser talented teams.
It feels like if you were a manager who were around kind of 12 years ago, immediately post Ferguson, then we might have more respect for his ability to change in different ways. We were less kind of in love with ideologues, I think, at that point.
Fergie was an unreal pragmatist, unbelievable, and people won't realize it, but United, because they had such a long lineage of the same core of players, and then they swapped out the core, but they still had players that were around for quite a long time. Like, he coached them into being able to play different styles, and they were responsive to it. And then I think the most amazing thing that I picked up on, which was one of the things that led me to the early set piece research, was the last couple of years that Fergie was in charge. They ended up, so allegedly, apocryphally, he became friends with Tony Pulis. And he watched what Pulis did with his teams. And then he managed to eke out 2 league titles off of the back of much lesser talented teams than he had previously, because they scored a lot of set pieces. And they scored set pieces like on par with anybody that was doing it, because, one, they created more of those situations, but 2, he implemented it and they trained it. And Patrice Evra were suddenly scoring 4 goals in a season with his head. Patrice Evra is like 5'7". He'd never had like a regular goal scoring off of that. The 2 guys that were taking corners were Robin van Persie on one side and Wayne Rooney on the other side. Nobody does that. Nobody takes their strikers and says, okay, we're going to create the deliveries there. And so we have lost some element of the truly elite, tactically smart coaches being able to chop and change stuff. And now we're like, oh, well, we just want teams that play this style over and over again. I think Thomas might be one of those rare individuals that brings more of that back.
Yeah. Look, I'm always here for any kind of Thomas Frank loving. But before this gets X-rated, I think we should probably move on. Though actually, should we talk about Bukayo Saka?
Speaking of X-rated, yeah,
exactly. Bukayo Saka. So you put something in the newsletter about James York of StatsBomb, who is a Spurs fan, saying that Bukayo Saka is the best player in the league in his opinion.
Yeah.
And he was basing this off StatsBomb's, well, not just basing it off, but StatsBomb's dribble and carry on ball value and pass on ball value, right? Where Saka is currently sky high.
Yeah.
Are you convinced by this argument? Are you convinced by another argument?
So I kind of have been leaning towards this for a couple of seasons now. And part of it is just looking at how versatile he is. So analytics has a hard time evaluating players that are super versatile. Like, we have an easy time looking at extreme outliers that do 1 or 2 things very, very well, right? But then when we find versatility and you get somebody that's in, like, say, the 85th percentile in a bunch of things, then you're like, oh, well, that player's really good, but they're not amazing at anything. The thing is, though, if you're able to turn things on against any team and then exploit one of those advantages, even if it doesn't show up in the stat sheet, and even if you're often double teamed, you are exceptional. And there are certain players that, they kind of call them the glue guys in American sports, where they have a full skill set. They're very intelligent at being able to read what the game and what the opponent is offering them. And then they have the traits inherent to be able to exploit those. Now, for Saka, he's not as fast as Salah. No one's gonna, like, if we had, like, the races of the attackers and they put this on pay-per-view on the Premier League and they had, like, a full suite of, like, a decathlon or something for Premier League attackers, you'd expect Saka to be, like, anywhere between, like, out of a top 10, you say maybe 5th, maybe 4th, but he's also stronger than you expect him to be. And he's one of the best attacking passers in the league, even if he doesn't look like it. And teams can never, ever, ever overcommit to him with one player because he just beats them over and over again. So he's that type of player where he does a lot of awesome things and he changes from game to game. And because of that, the OBV, or the possession value metric, on ball value, is showing up in ways that has only appeared in recent times with Kevin De Bruyne in like one of De Bruyne's best seasons. Is it sustainable? I don't know, but he's been doing it through a double team when Arsenal have not been awesome in attack. So to me, that indicates that, like, yeah, he's 23 years old and at least one of the top 5, but might be the best player in the league.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think that's exactly it. Like, there's this idea that without Odegaard, and while Arsenal fans themselves have been complaining about the toothlessness of Arsenal's left-hand side, Saka has remained an extremely productive attacker that entire time. And as you say, the fact that Saka can play in a game, he can play as a real wide run at them, take them on winger. He can come inside and find an incredible pass, which he did do several times during the Odegaard period out. His shot volume has steadily crept up. He's carrying the ball into the penalty area more. His progressive receptions, which were always pretty crazy, have just gone absolutely berserk. The last couple of years, every time I've looked, it's usually him and Vinny top of it. And now I think in the absence of Kroos, Vinny is probably changing slightly. Though again, maybe different formations. But the fact it's kind of the Messi argument. I'm not saying Saka is that guy, but the amazing thing about Messi was that he was amazing at everything, despite the fact that there were like 6 guys trying to cut his ankles off all the time. It was unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the other thing, so Odegaard's crazy important to Arsenal in ways that are much more obvious. And the combination of the two is what beats teams over and over again. Because when you have to overcompensate for Saka being out there, then that opens up space for the midfielder that's on Saka's side. And that's always Odegaard. And Odegaard's passing is able to open up the other side very quickly. His situational awareness is that way too. And so when you overplay one of the weapons, then the next person next to them is able to create much more because of it. In the absence of either of those, they might be problematic. There's an argument that says that if you had Sterling out there or Nwaneri out there, like, Odegaard would be the more important of the two. But that is, in and of itself, is like a little bit of the center of the pitch is more important than the wide areas, right? But how are you getting there is one of the important questions. And these are one of the great things you can argue about in football. But I think, anybody who looks at it would say that right now, the 2 best players in the league, the 3 best players in the league are Salah, Cole Palmer, and Saka. And they are all very different in what they do. I think Palmer is a little closer to what Saka does, but none of them can replicate the exactness of the other skill set.
Yeah, and we're really lucky that we kind of got all those at the same time. I mean, a lot of other people, the argument is made in their absence. It really does feel like it's good for Rodri that we've seen this absolute horror show. And even also for Odegaard, given the way that Arsenal have been for the last couple of months, like really grindy. It's an argument for those guys as well, I guess. But
Arsenal are fun to watch now. And that's a pleasant
nice
upgrade. We were worried about them being able to switch it back on. Clearly, they still have all of the connector tissue there from when he was out. We have to wrap this because I have to go do a school run. But what I did want to say is, coming into the holiday season, if you wanted to give us a gift, can you just tell your friends how much you like this? Because we see it in the comments. We appreciate it. But we want to keep growing as quickly as possible. Next year, we're going to start to monetize a little bit. We'll try to be as non-obnoxious about it as possible. But you guys clearly love it. And we love doing it. I think Patrick and I have a lot of fun. And Ravi also has a lot of fun when he's around. So just tell your friends, like, even if you told them before, tell them again, like, hey, this is the best podcast. Like, tell people on the internet, because we appreciate it, and our growth is going to sustain our volume of doing things. We may even at some point add another show per week as we go along. So that's the gift that I request from you. And happy December as we get into the glut of Christmas time games where teams are going to be tired. They're going to be overwhelmed. They're going to have injuries. But also, there's just so much football to watch and be played. Like, we're lucky as fans to have it.
We are lucky to have it. And we're lucky that you watch and listen every week. If you have enjoyed this, please do like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app, and make sure that you're signed up for the newsletter as well. We're going to leave you here, but stick around because we've got some B-roll after this, and this week, I think it's definitely worth sticking around for. Thanks very much, and we'll catch you next time.
So recently I started talking to this woman, and like, you never know what to expect, right? I have to go to London to date most of the time, because even though there's like 500,000 people in my local area, it's very, very different than 8 million or whatever.
Sure.
So like, she's really smart and she's interesting and she has this fascinating, varied life. But we're talking like, I don't know, we talked to each other for like 10, 11 days. And she says something kind of offhand. And I was like, huh. And she follows it up, basically says, yeah, so when I was younger, I was voted as, in the top 25 in best breasts in the world in one of the lads magazines.
Oh, cool.
And my claim to fame is that I beat out Elle Macpherson. I was like, oh my God, I had the biggest crush on Elle Macpherson when I was a teenager. She's like, see, there you go. I was like, look, I was very happily going to go out with you anyway, but this makes for an even better story. And then she sends me the photo of the lads magazine as proof. And I was like, I think you're perfect. Like, let's go on. Anyway, yeah, there you go.
I mean, you'd have probably taken it on faith, right? But I
would absolutely. There was no doubt in my mind. I come from the time now where I just believe women, right? We just believe women.
Oh, pre-HR department conversations. This is excellent stuff. Oh my God.